Rocket attacks at Europe's largest nuclear power plant, located in Ukraine, over the weekend, are raising fears of a nuclear catastrophe. This, according to the United Nations nuclear watchdog, as both Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other for the explosions at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Ukraine's president calling the attack terrorism. The plant has been under Russian control since March. But Russia is releasing this video purporting to show damage inflicted by Ukrainian forces. NBC News cannot verify that claim. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency saying, quote, every principle of the nuclear safety has been violated. Joining us now is Joe Cirincione, a nuclear power expert and former advisor, of course, to the State Department, and Ben Rhodes, former deputy national security advisor during the Obama administration. Joe, this is obviously volatile. So how do we know what's going on? The inspectors say they can't get in because it's under fire. The Russians say they've mined it. So what is the chance that nuclear material could be released?
Well, that's the first risk that you have, is that we don't know what's going on in the plant. And this is what IAEA Director Rafael Grossi warns about. We don't have secure communications. We don't have secure power. The staff is operating at gunpoint. And of course, now we have shelling in and around the facility, risking the structural integrity of the facility itself. The kind of disaster that you're worried about is a shell piercing some of the concrete containment facilities, either of the reactors. There's 6 reactors there at the plant, 2 are known to be operating, or the storage for the spent fuel, either one of which would release clouds of radioactive debris into the air. We're not talking about a nuclear explosion, but we are looking at a major release of radioactivity that would contaminate large parts of Ukraine and Russia itself.
And of course, the IAEA is pointing out that there are rocket attacks, but Russia blaming Ukraine, and we really have no way to ascertain. I guess, obviously, our intelligence community can look at those rockets, the pieces of artillery there. But right now, we can't determine whether there was an accidental hit.
That's exactly right. Ukrainians are saying that these are Russian shells because Russia is conducting military operations in the area. They have positioned artillery and ammunition at the plant and are firing on Ukrainian forces, knowing the Ukrainians won't risk firing back. The evidence seems to indicate that these are actually Russian shells coming from Russian military operations in and around the area. It appears to be an errant rocket that hit here, but it's still not clear.
Ben, you've got both sides blaming each other. You've got a nuclear power plant, the biggest in all of Europe. I mean, this could be a true catastrophe. The Russians know about Chernobyl, but of course the worst effects of that actually happened west of Russia because of the way, the way the winds were blowing. So it threatens Scandinavia. I mean, now you're talking about Europe itself.
Yeah, I mean, the worst effects were in Ukraine and Belarus, but Russians themselves were not immune. And of course, that event helped bring down really the Soviet Union. And so Putin has in his historical memory the fact that something going bad at a nuclear plant can have unintended consequences. I think, Andrea, if you step back, we may not be able to know who is responsible for an individual shell, but this wouldn't be happening if the Russians weren't there occupying that nuclear plant and using it by all accounts. It's clear that they're using it for some of their military operations as kind of a staging ground. And it fits with a pattern we've seen, weaponizing food through the grain crisis, food not getting out of the Odessa port, weaponizing nuclear plants, weaponizing Americans, innocent Americans like Brittany Griner. They are willing now, a nuclear-armed power is willing to cross any line and behave purely as a rogue nation. And the only thing that seems to put additional pressure on Putin beyond, obviously, the fighting in Ukraine, the arming of the Ukrainians, the sanctions, is the potential for greater global outcry in opposition to Russia. There have been a lot of fence-sitters around the world in terms of the sanctions regime, in terms of diplomatic pressure on Putin. And when you look at his feeling that he needed to be seen as doing something on the grain crisis, reaching that agreement with Turkey, allowing some grain to get out, although not as much and as securely as we'd like, I think this is another issue where internationalizing the pressure and the outrage over this flagrant violation of every nuclear norm is going to be important to trying to get Putin to back down from this very dangerous game of essentially using a nuclear plant as cover for his military operation.
And Ben, you mentioned Griner. Let me shift to that with you. because there is talk of a possible prisoner swap. We now know the Russians say they will talk as long as it's kept private. Former UN Ambassador Bill Richardson was on ABC on Sunday and said he was talking to both sides. And here's what he had to say.
I'm optimistic. I think she's going to be freed. I think she has the right strategy of contrition, a good legal team. There's going to be a prisoner swap, though, and I think it'll be 2 for 2, involving Paul Whelan. We can't forget him. He's an American Marine.
Well, you say 2 for 2, but...
So 2 for 2 suggests 2 Russians, not just Viktor Bout. 2 Russians. We don't know if he's talking about the Russian assassin who's in a jail in Germany and not under our control, FSB by all accounts, or some other Russian. I don't know what your read is on this.
It's a high price, Andrea. My read on this is the Russians will do a prisoner swap. They wouldn't be going down this path of negotiation. This is kind of coming out from them as well as the U.S. side that essentially they want to do a prisoner swap and they want Viktor Bout at the core of it. I think the Russians want to get as much as they can. And the more attention there is on the Brittany Griner case in a strange way, the more they feel like they can leverage that to their end. I think the U.S. has a harder time controlling people in German prisons, but I think this likely ends in a prisoner swap.
Well, one hope before not too long, given the conditions in Russian captivity. Ben Rhodes, Joe Cirincione, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
And Target.